who is also going to be sharing his thoughts on this situation as we see it in Kano State. Great to have you on this show this afternoon.
Good afternoon.
All right, so help us understand in detail, if you will, this development from the legal perspective. This, I'm sure, seems quite unprecedented, which calls to question the integrity of the judiciary. What's going on?
Let me put it this way, very frankly. I do not think this singular issue has brought the reputation or the integrity of the judiciary to question. Generally speaking, for a member of the public, a voter, reading that last page of the judgment, you would want to say that the appeal has been allowed, and as such, the governor sitting has had his election affirmed. But what I would say as a lawyer is that anyone who reads a judgment must read the judgment in its totality. It's not enough to look at the last page and come to a conclusion. In other words, even when you take a law report and you find places where you have the items held, that should not be the basis for determining what the outcome of that appeal of the trial was. What you ought to do is look at the reasoning of the justices. In this case, two essential issues were debated by the parties. One was whether the appellant was indeed a member of the NNPP. Did they tender the register of the party? Was he a member of the party when he was elected and all that? You ought to look at the reasoning of the judges and determine whether the outcome was that he indeed was a member of the party, and as such, his election was to be affirmed. Second, the votes that were, the ballot papers that were used, were they such that they could be counted? Did they have the stamp, and were they signed? If they were not, and the reasoning of the justice was that they fell short of the requirement of the law, then can we actually also say that the justice could have come to the conclusion that the governor was duly elected? But that being as it may, when you're faced with an appeal and there are different grounds, the fact that some grounds have succeeded would not mean that that appeal will be affirmed. The blue pencil rule should be called to aid the determination of whether or not the appeal has succeeded. In which case, you draw an imaginary blue pencil and see whether the issues that were found in favor of the appellant are sufficient to affirm or to grant the appeal. In this situation, I think that the appropriate thing would be that the lawyers involved should not allow the polity to be overheated. They can meet, look at this judgment, and if need be, apply to the court for clarification. It's difficult for me to understand that the justices would want to recant after giving a judgment saying that the appeal was unsuccessful, and as such, Mr. Gawuna should be elected governor. So what we ought to be talking about here is visiting the Court of Appeal again, saying we want clarification. But we must not allow every situation on our hands, particularly with the judiciary, to be made a political matter. I would say again that this is a situation where lawyers must come wearing their thinking caps and ensuring that they, being lawyers, present in court where the pronouncement was made, know what the outcome of that appeal was. And I would not sit here and say this is what it was or this is what it was not. But I have given my guide. They should sit together, if need be, approach the Court of Appeal for clarification. The reasoning, reading in totality, the judgment is what should determine what the outcome was. And I have no doubts in my mind, particularly the Honorable Justice who wrote the lead judgment. I think his name is Moore Adumain, is a man who has a reputation. I do not think he's one who is going to be handing to the to the sentiments of the electorate. If there has been an error, it must be corrected. And I would also advise that judges and justices of the appellate courts must look very carefully at the secretarial department and administration. So if there's an error at that point, such error is not carried not only into the courtroom, but into the certified true copies of judgments. That's my advice.
So in the case of from what you have already pointed out, I mean, the Supreme Court, the highest court in the land, do you see any chance that perhaps they might also wade into this matter?
Well, if the matter is brought before them, and that's thankfully we have this the governorship election appeal, so they can still go to the Supreme Court. Either party can say, well, we believe that having come to this conclusion, or by the reasoning of the justice of the Court of Appeal, the conclusion that should have arrived at would have been this or that. The justice of the Supreme Court will have the benefit of looking at what has transpired from the tribunal to the Court of Appeal, and then they will determine the matter. I mean, one is grateful to God that we still have an opportunity, but believe me, I do not think that the Court of Appeal in this instance should be berated beyond the fact that I think there has been an error somewhere and it should be avoided in the future.
Indeed, an error which should be avoided. But thank you so much, Mr. Kaide Adelola, Senior Advocate of Nigeria. We thank you for your thoughts on the issue, and thank you for joining us, of course, on Lunchtime Politics.
Thank you.
Now, following the re-election of Governor Hope Uzodinma as Governor of